The grand theater buzzed with anticipation. Tonight was Ava's night. Not just another performance, but the premiere of her most challenging role yet. Violetta in La Traviata. Critics whispered about her soaring soprano, her ability to imbue the tragic courtesan with a vulnerability that resonated deep within the soul. Few knew the true source of that vulnerability, the unsettling premonitions that haunted her dreams, now subtly bleeding into her art. Ava didn't realize she was singing secrets. She chose arias that felt intuitively right, modifying cadenzas, adding grace notes where none existed before. It was artistic license, she thought, a way to breathe new life into familiar melodies. What she didn't understand was that these subtle alterations, these seemingly insignificant deviations from the score, were unknowingly unraveling a complex web of coded information. The Syndicate, a shadowy organization known only as such, thrived on secrets. They dealt in information, manipulating markets, controlling governments, and silencing anyone who threatened their power. Their leader, known only as the Maestro, was a meticulous man. A collector of rare manuscripts and a patron of the arts, he appreciated beauty, but he valued control above all else. The Maestro attended Ava's performance that night. A shadowy figure in the back of the opulent box, he admired her voice, her passion, the way she commanded the stage. But as the performance progressed, a growing unease settled upon him. He recognized patterns within her singing, sequences that triggered alarms in his carefully constructed world. At first, he dismissed it as coincidence, a mere quirk of interpretation. But as Ava reached the climax of Act 2, a chilling realization dawned. She was singing their secrets. Unbeknownst to Ava, the musical phrases she was weaving into her performance were mirroring encrypted data streams, exposing details of the Syndicate's illicit operations, a planned arms shipment disguised as humanitarian aid, a corrupt politician in their pocket, the location of a hidden offshore account, all subtly encoded within her vocal performance. The Maestro's face hardened. This was not mere coincidence. Someone, somehow, had used Ava as a conduit, a seemingly innocent vessel to transmit dangerous information. He didn't know how, and frankly, he didn't care. The information was out there, hanging in the air like the lingering notes of her final aria. The leak needed to be plugged, and Ava, the unwitting source, needed to be silenced. He gave a subtle nod to his lieutenant, a silent command that set in motion a chain of events that would irrevocably alter Ava's life, turning her world of music and acclaim into a deadly game of cat and mouse. Her final note echoed in the theater, and with it, her fate was sealed. The order was given with the chilling efficiency that characterized the Maestro's reign. His lieutenant, a man known only as Silas, received the silent command with a barely perceptible nod. He was a master of discretion, a ghost in the machine of the Syndicate, capable of making problems disappear without a trace. Silas immediately activated his network. He didn't know how Ava was singing secrets, nor did he particularly care. His job was simply to eliminate the threat, and he had a team of specialists ready to execute the task. First, a soft touch, an attempt to make her death look like an accident, a faulty lighting rig, a misplaced step on a darkened staircase, sudden, inexplicable illness. These were all viable options, designed to avoid suspicion and minimize collateral damage. The Maestro, however, was not entirely convinced by the soft-touch approach. He suspected there was more to this than met the eye. Someone was feeding Ava information, using her as a vessel. He wanted to know who and why. But for now, silencing her was paramount. He instructed Silas to expedite the process, to be prepared to escalate to more direct methods if necessary. Meanwhile, Ava remained blissfully unaware of the danger she was in. She basked in the afterglow of her successful premiere, reading reviews, attending celebratory dinners, and planning her next performance. The unsettling premonitions still lingered, but she dismissed them as stage fright, the inevitable anxieties that accompanied her demanding career. Silas, ever the pragmatist, initiated the soft-touch protocols that a stagehand, bribed with a hefty sum and the promise of a new life, subtly loosened a bolt-on, a lighting rig above the stage. During the next performance, the rig was scheduled to plummet, crushing Ava beneath its weight. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. During a rehearsal, a young violinist, captivated by Ava's voice, wandered onto the stage. As Ava reached a particularly high note, The lighting rig began to sway precariously. The violinist, startled by the movement, stumbled backward, knocking over a music stand. The noise startled Ava, causing her to miss a note. Frustrated, she stopped the rehearsal, demanding the stagehands secure the rig. The loosened bolt was discovered, and the incident was dismissed as a near-miss accident. The stagehand, realizing his plan had been foiled, panicked and fled, disappearing into the anonymity of the city. Silas, informed of the failed attempt, was furious. The maestro's patience was wearing thin. He ordered a more direct approach. A team of assassins, disguised as fans, would infiltrate Ava's next performance. They would use silenced pistols to eliminate her during a particularly quiet passage, making her death look like a random act of violence. The message was clear. Ava needed to be silenced, and silenced permanently. The game had begun, and Ava was about to learn that the stakes were far higher than she could ever have imagined. The near miss with the lighting rig did little to raise Ava's suspicions. She chalked it up to a simple maintenance error, a consequence of the theater's aging infrastructure. The incident faded from her mind as quickly as it had occurred, replaced by the demanding schedule of rehearsals and performances. She focused on perfecting her craft, pushing her voice to its limits, and immersing herself in the emotional depths of her characters. Silas's team, however, was far from finished. The maestro's impatience was palpable, and another failure was not an option. He deployed the team of assassins, meticulously planning their infiltration of the opera house. They purchased tickets in various locations throughout the auditorium, blending in with the audience, their movements carefully coordinated. Their plan was simple. During a particularly poignant scene in Act 3, as Ava sang a heart-wrenching lament, they would simultaneously fire silenced pistols, creating a brief moment of chaos before disappearing into the crowd. The maestro wanted it to look random, senseless, a tragedy that would shock the city and send a message to anyone else contemplating crossing him. As Ava prepared for the performance, a sense of unease settled upon her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that she was being watched, but she dismissed it as nerves, the pressure of performing under the watchful eyes of critics and fans. She stepped onto the stage, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight, and began to sing. The assassins, positioned strategically throughout the auditorium, tensed, their fingers hovering over the triggers of their silenced pistols. They waited for their cue, the precise moment when Ava's voice reached its peak of vulnerability. But as she sang, a strange thing happened. The audience, captivated by her performance, began to weep. The raw emotion in her voice, the palpable pain in her eyes, resonated deeply within their souls. One of the assassins, a hardened veteran who had seen countless acts of violence, found himself moved by her performance. He hesitated, his finger twitching on the trigger. He couldn't bring himself to interrupt such beauty, to snuff out such a vibrant light. He lowered his pistol, his resolve crumbling under the weight of Ava's artistry. Another assassin, equally affected by the performance, experienced a similar crisis of conscience. He had carried out countless assignments without question, but something about Ava's vulnerability, her raw humanity, touched him in a way he couldn't explain. That he too lowered his weapon, his heart heavy with a sense of shame. The plan faltered. The assassins, overwhelmed by Ava's performance, were unable to carry out their mission. They slipped away unnoticed, abandoning their assignment, leaving Ava to continue her performance, still unaware of the danger she had narrowly escaped. Silas, monitoring the situation from afar, was livid. Another failure. The maestro would be furious. That he knew he had to act quickly, to find a more reliable way to eliminate Ava before she exposed any more of the syndicate's secrets. He began to formulate a new plan, a more audacious, more direct approach that would leave no room for error. The game was far from over, and the stakes were about to get even higher. Far from the opulent opera house and the shadowy machinations of the syndicate, in a remote cabin nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains, lived a man named Bishop. The name was an alias, a ghost of his former life. He was once a highly skilled Black Ops agent, a master of infiltration, assassination, and extraction. He worked in the shadows, carrying out missions that governments couldn't acknowledge, silencing threats before they could materialize. But the life had taken its toll. The faces of his victims haunted his dreams, their silent screams echoing in the stillness of the night. He had traded his weapons for solitude, his tailored suits for flannel shirts, his adrenaline-fueled existence for the quiet rhythm of the mountains. He lived off the grid, hunting for his food, chopping his own wood, and avoiding all contact with the outside world. He sought redemption in isolation, hoping to bury the sins of his past beneath the weight of his new life. His cabin was sparsely furnished, but meticulously organized. Every item had its place, a reflection of the discipline that had defined his previous life. A worn leather-bound journal sat on his desk, filled with cryptic entries, philosophical musings, and sketches of his former comrades. A single photograph, tucked away in a drawer, showed a young girl with bright, inquisitive eyes, her smile radiant and full of life. It was a picture of Ava, taken years ago, a reminder of a past he had tried to forget. Bishop had crossed paths with Ava years ago. During a mission in Eastern Europe, he had been tasked with extracting a high-ranking government official who possessed sensitive information about the syndicate. Ava, then a child prodigy, was caught in the crossfire. Bishop had rescued her, risking his own life to ensure her safety. He had watched over her from afar, ensuring she was safe and protected, a silent guardian angel watching over his charge. He knew about her rising career, her extraordinary talent, her unwavering dedication to her art. He followed her progress through news articles and online performances. Quiet observer in the shadows, he had hoped she would live a life free from the violence and corruption that had consumed his own. But the past had a way of catching up as Silas escalated his efforts to silence Ava. A ripple effect was felt in the hidden corners of the world, reaching those who had sworn to protect her. Bishop's former handler, a woman named Echo, knew about his connection to Ava. She knew about the debt he owed, the promise he had made to keep her safe. She knew he was the only one who could protect her from the storm that was brewing. Echo found him, not through electronic means, but through old-fashioned methods, following a trail of breadcrumbs left by his past. She arrived at his cabin unannounced, her presence shattering the tranquility he had so carefully cultivated. She carried a message, a warning, and a plea for help. Ava was in danger, and Bishop was the only one who could save her. The time for solitude was over. The time for action had come. Echo stood, silhouetted against the doorway of the cabin, the dying embers of the fire casting long, dancing shadows across her face. She hadn't changed much in the years since Bishop had last seen her. Her eyes were still sharp and calculating, her posture still rigid and professional, but beneath the surface, Bishop could detect a hint of desperation, a vulnerability he had never witnessed before. "They're not playing games, Bishop," Echo said, her voice low and urgent. "This isn't some rogue operative acting out of turn. This is the maestro himself. That he wants Ava silenced, and he's not going to stop until she's dead." Bishop remained silent, his expression unreadable. He knew Echo wouldn't have come unless the situation was dire. She was a pragmatist, a realist. Sentimentality had no place in their world. The attempts on her life, they've been sloppy, Echo continued. Almost amateurish. That's because they were tests, Bishop. Probes to assess the level of security around her. They're escalating. Next time, they won't make mistakes. Echo explained how Ava had unwittingly encoded sensitive information into her performances, exposing the syndicate's illicit activities. She didn't know how it had happened, but the fact remained. Ava was a threat, and the maestro wanted her neutralized. "I know you're out of the game, Bishop," Echo said, her voice softening slightly. "I know you've tried to leave all this behind. But Ava, she's different. You saved her life once. You can't let her die now." Bishop turned away, his gaze fixed on the snow-covered mountains in the distance. He remembered the fear in Ava's eyes that day in Eastern Europe, the vulnerability of a child caught in a world of violence and deceit. He had made a promise to protect her, a promise he had carried with him ever since. "She doesn't even know you exist," Echo pressed, sensing his hesitation. "She has no idea the danger she's in. She's just an innocent caught in the crossfire." Echo then played her final card, revealing a detail Bishop had long tried to suppress. "Her father, he was one of us, Bishop. He died protecting you. You owe him and you owe her." The weight of his past crashed down upon him, the memories of his fallen comrade flooding his mind. He had sworn to protect his family. To ensure their safety, he had failed. But now, he had a chance to redeem himself, to honor his fallen friend by protecting his daughter. Bishop turned back to Echo, his eyes filled with a steely resolve. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Everything they know, everything they've done, that I need to know what I'm up against." Echo nodded, a flicker of relief in her eyes. She knew she had reached him, had tapped into the sense of duty and loyalty that still burned within him, despite his efforts to extinguish it. The time for solitude was over. Bishop was back in the game, and this time, it was personal. The next morning, Bishop was gone. He left no trace, only a faint scent of wood smoke lingering in the air. Echo knew him well enough to understand that he wouldn't contact her. He would work alone. Silently, methodically. He would become a ghost once more, a shadow watching over Ava from the darkness. Bishop arrived in the city, a chameleon blending seamlessly into the urban landscape. He discarded his flannel shirts and hiking boots, replacing them with tailored suits and polished shoes. He reactivated old contacts, gathering intelligence, and establishing a network of informants. He needed to know everything about Ava's schedule, her routines, her vulnerabilities. He began observing Ava from a distance, studying her movements, analyzing her security protocols. He attended her performances, sitting in the shadows, his eyes scanning the audience for potential threats. He saw the adoration in the faces of her fans, the envy in the eyes of her rivals, and the subtle menace lurking in the shadows. He confirmed the syndicate's involvement within days. He identified Silas's operatives, recognizing their training, their tactics, their unwavering dedication to their mission. He saw them lurking in the wings of the opera house, blending in with the stagehands, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd. He also noticed the subtle changes in Ava's behavior. She seemed more anxious, more withdrawn. She was losing weight. Her eyes were haunted by shadows, and her voice lacked its usual vibrancy. He knew she sensed the danger, even if she couldn't articulate it. Bishop resisted the urge to intervene directly. He knew that rushing and guns blazing would only escalate the situation, putting Ava in even greater danger. Needed to gather more information, to understand the full extent of the threat before he could act. He spent hours poring over security footage, analyzing surveillance reports, and interviewing potential witnesses. He discovered that the syndicate had infiltrated the opera house, planting informants in key positions, monitoring Ava's every move. He also learned about the maestro's obsession with Ava, his fascination with her talent, and his unwavering determination to silence her as he pieced together the puzzle. Bishop realized that Ava was not just a target. She was a pawn in a much larger game. The syndicate was using her to transmit coded messages, to communicate with their operatives around the world. He didn't know who was behind it or why, but he knew that Ava was in grave danger. He decided it was time to act. He couldn't wait any longer. He needed to get closer to Ava, to establish contact, and to warn her about the threat she faced. But he knew that approaching her directly would be risky. He needed a plan, a way to gain her trust without revealing his true identity. The game was about to change, and Bishop was ready to play. Silas, reeling from the previous failures, knew he was running out of time. The maestro's patience had reached its limit. He needed results, and he needed them now. He decided to abandon the subtle approach and unleash his most lethal asset, a highly trained assassin known as the Nightingale, a master of disguise and close-quarters combat. The Nightingale was unlike any assassin Silas had ever worked with. She was a ghost, a whisper in the wind, capable of infiltrating even the most secure locations. She had a reputation for never failing, for leaving no trace, and for executing her targets with cold, calculated precision. The Nightingale's plan was audacious. She would replace one of Ava's understudies, a young soprano who occasionally filled in for her during rehearsals. She would learn Ava's routines, her mannerisms, her singing style. She would become her shadow, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Bishop, monitoring the situation from afar, recognized the shift in tactics. He saw the Nightingale infiltrating the opera house, observing Ava, and mimicking her every move. He knew that time was running out. He couldn't wait any longer to make his move. During a high-stakes performance of Tosca, Bishop knew this was his moment. The nightingale, disguised as Ava's understudy, was waiting in the wings, a poisoned hairpin concealed in her elaborate hairstyle. She planned to approach Ava during the intermission, offering her a seemingly innocent gesture of support, and then deliver the fatal blow as Ava stepped onto the stage. Bishop knew he had to act quickly. He couldn't risk approaching her directly. The nightingale would be watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. He needed to create a distraction, a moment of chaos that would allow him to intervene without exposing himself. During a particularly dramatic scene, as Ava sang a powerful aria, Bishop triggered a carefully orchestrated series of events. He used his technical skills to disable the theater's security system, causing a brief blackout. The audience gasped, the stagehands panicked, and the nightingale seized her opportunity as the lights flickered back on. The nightingale approached Ava, a sinister smile playing on her lips. But before she could reach her, Bishop intervened, appearing out of nowhere, a blur of motion and controlled violence. He disarmed the nightingale, twisting her arm behind her back and forcing her to the ground. The audience erupted in chaos. Security guards rushed onto the stage, sirens blared, and Ava stood frozen in shock, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Bishop, his face grim and determined, grabbed Ava's hand and pulled her off the stage, disappearing into the labyrinthine corridors of the opera house. His presence was now revealed. The maestro would know he was involved, and he would stop at nothing to eliminate him. But Bishop didn't care. His priority was Ava, and he would do whatever it took to protect her, even if it meant sacrificing himself. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. Bishop dragged Ava through the darkened corridors of the opera house. His grip firm but gentle, she stumbled, her elaborate costume hindering her movements. She was terrified, confused, and utterly disoriented. Who was this man, and why had he attacked her understudy? What's going on? Ava demanded, her voice trembling. Who are you? What do you want? Bishop didn't answer. He focused on their escape, navigating the labyrinthine passageways with practiced ease. He knew the opera house like the back of his hand, having spent weeks studying its layout, identifying its hidden exits and secret passages. They emerged into a deserted alleyway, the city lights casting long shadows across the grimy brick walls. Bishop hailed a taxi, shoving Ava inside before she could protest. Where are you taking me? Ava asked, her eyes wide with suspicion. Somewhere safe, Bishop replied, his voice low and urgent. You're in danger, Ava. You need to trust me. Ava scoffed. Trust you? You just attacked someone on stage. You expect me to trust you? Bishop sighed. He knew he had to convince her, but he didn't have time for explanations. They were being hunted, and every second counted. He pulled out a small device from his pocket, a sophisticated piece of technology that allowed him to intercept encrypted communications. He played a recording of a conversation between Silas and the nightingale, detailing their plan to assassinate Ava. Ava listened in stunned silence, her face paling with each passing word. She recognized Silas's voice, the smooth, sinister tone that had always made her uneasy. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Someone wanted her dead. This is real, Ava, Bishop said, his voice grave. They've been trying to kill you for weeks. The lighting rig, the assassins in the audience. It was all them. Ava shook her head in disbelief. But why? I haven't done anything to anyone. You don't know it, but you've stumbled upon something dangerous, Bishop explained. You've been singing secrets, Ava. Secrets that powerful people want to keep hidden. He told her about the syndicate, about their illicit activities, and about the maestro's obsession with silencing her. He explained how her voice had become a weapon, unknowingly transmitting coded messages that threatened their empire. Ava was overwhelmed. She couldn't comprehend the scale of the conspiracy, the depth of the deception. She had always lived in a world of music and art, a world of beauty and emotion. She had never imagined that her voice could be used for such sinister purposes. I don't understand, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. How is this possible? It doesn't matter how it's possible, Bishop said, his voice firm. What matters is that you're in danger, and I'm the only one who can protect you. He handed her the nightingale's poisoned hairpin, a stark reminder of the danger she faced. Ava stared at the weapon, her eyes filled with fear and disbelief. The reality of the situation finally hit her. She was no longer just an opera singer. She was a target, hunted by a ruthless organization that would stop at nothing to silence her. And the only person she could trust was a stranger, a man who had appeared out of nowhere, claiming to be her protector. The taxi sped through the city streets, Bishop constantly scanning their surroundings. He knew Silas would be mobilizing his forces, tracking them using every resource at his disposal. They needed to disappear, to vanish without a trace. He directed the driver to a secluded warehouse district on the outskirts of the city. He paid him handsomely, warning him to forget he had ever seen them. They exited the taxi, disappearing into the shadows of the deserted buildings. "Where are we going?" Ava asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Somewhere they won't find us," Bishop replied, his tone grim. "But we can't stay hidden forever. You need to learn to protect yourself." Ava stared at him in disbelief. "Protect myself? I'm an opera singer. I don't know anything about fighting." "You're stronger than you think," Bishop said, his eyes unwavering. "You have a fire within you, a resilience that you haven't even tapped into yet. I'm going to show you how to use it." He led her to a dilapidated warehouse, its interior filled with crates, barrels, and discarded machinery. He set to work, improvising a training ground using whatever materials he could find. He started with the basics: situational awareness, self-defense techniques, and hand-to-hand combat. He taught her how to use her surroundings to her advantage, how to turn everyday objects into weapons, and how to anticipate an attack before it happened. Ava struggled at first. Her body was stiff and uncoordinated, her movements awkward and hesitant. She had spent her life honing her voice, not her physical skills. But Bishop was patient, pushing her to her limits, demanding that she overcome her fears and embrace her inner strength. As the days passed, Ava began to transform. She learned to move with grace and agility, her reflexes sharpened, her confidence growing. She discovered a hidden reservoir of strength within herself, a determination to survive that she never knew she possessed. Bishop also taught her how to use a gun, instructing her on the proper techniques for handling and firing a weapon. Ava was initially repulsed by the idea of using violence, but she quickly realized that it was a necessary skill if she wanted to survive. Meanwhile, Silas's forces were closing in. They had tracked Bishop and Ava to the warehouse district, using surveillance technology and informants to narrow their search. They were methodical, relentless, and determined to eliminate them both. Bishop knew that they couldn't stay in the warehouse for long. They needed to move, to find a new safe house, and to devise a plan to fight back against the syndicate. He also knew that Ava was ready. She was no longer just an opera singer. She was a survivor, a warrior, a force to be reckoned with as they prepared to leave the warehouse. Bishop looked at Ava, his eyes filled with pride and admiration. "You're ready," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You're stronger than you ever imagined. Now let's show them what you're made of." As Ava slept fitfully in the back of the stolen SUV, Bishop's mind drifted back to that fateful day in Eastern Europe. The air was thick with tension, the streets filled with armed soldiers and panicked civilians. He was on a mission to extract a high-ranking government official who had defected, seeking asylum in the West. The official possessed sensitive information about the syndicate, information that could cripple their operations for years to come. But the mission had gone wrong. The syndicate had anticipated their move, ambushing them in a crowded marketplace. A firefight erupted, chaos consuming the streets. Bishop, separated from his team, found himself pinned down, surrounded by enemy forces. That's when he saw her, a young girl, no more than 10 years old, caught in the crossfire, her eyes wide with terror. She was separated from her parents, lost in the pandemonium. Bishop knew he had to help her, even if it meant jeopardizing his mission. He fought his way through the crowd, shielding the girl with his body, protecting her from the flying bullets. He managed to reach her, scooping her up in his arms and carrying her to safety. He found her parents, reuniting them in a tearful embrace. The girl was Ava. He learned her name later, from the grateful parents who showered him with thanks. He never forgot her face, her bright, inquisitive eyes, her radiant smile. He had saved her life that day, and he had vowed to protect her, to watch over her from afar. After the mission, Bishop had requested a transfer, wanting to distance himself from the violence and corruption that had consumed his life. He had followed Ava's progress from afar, reading about her musical accomplishments, watching her performances online. He had taken solace in her success, knowing that he had played a small part in shaping her destiny. But the syndicate had a long memory. They never forgot a slight, never forgave a betrayal. They had waited for years, biding their time, until Ava had become a threat to their operations. They had used her as a pawn, unknowingly transmitting coded messages that threatened their empire. Bishop knew that he couldn't let them harm her. He had a debt to repay, a promise to keep. He would protect her, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. Another flashback. Years later, after retiring from active service, Bishop found himself drawn back to Ava. He learned that she was struggling, facing financial difficulties, and battling self-doubt. He anonymously provided her with financial support, ensuring that she could continue her musical studies. He never revealed his identity, preferring to remain a silent guardian angel, watching over her from the shadows. He had always believed that she was destined for greatness, that her voice had the power to change the world. He couldn't let the syndicate silence her. To extinguish her light, he would fight them, tooth and nail, until his last breath. He would protect Ava, no matter the cost. Hidden away in a dilapidated motel room miles from the city, Bishop and Ava began the painstaking process of deciphering the secrets she had unwittingly revealed. Bishop had managed to procure recordings of Ava's recent performances, and they spent hours listening to them, dissecting the musical phrases, searching for patterns and anomalies. "It's like a code," Ava said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But I don't understand how it works. I'm just singing the music." "Someone is using your voice, Ava," Bishop replied, his gaze intense. "They're manipulating the melodies, inserting hidden messages that only certain people can understand." Bishop had contacted Echo, requesting her expertise in cryptography and code breaking. She had sent him a specialized software program that analyzed the musical recordings, searching for recurring sequences and statistical anomalies as the program ran. A series of encrypted data streams began to emerge, revealing fragments of information about the syndicate's illicit activities. At first, the information was fragmented and incomplete, but as they analyzed more recordings, the pieces began to fall into place. They discovered that the syndicate was involved in a massive international arms-dealing operation, selling weapons to terrorist groups and rogue nations. They were using Ava's voice to transmit the coordinates of hidden arms caches, the dates and times of shipments, and the names of key players in the network. But that was not all. They also uncovered evidence of human trafficking, revealing that the syndicate was smuggling women and children across international borders, forcing them into prostitution and slavery. They were using Ava's voice to transmit coded messages to their operatives, coordinating the movements of their victims and evading law enforcement. Ava was horrified by what she had uncovered. She had always believed in the power of music to heal and inspire, to bring people together and promote understanding. She couldn't believe that her voice had been used to perpetrate such unspeakable acts of violence and exploitation. "This is monstrous," she said, her voice trembling with rage and disgust. "How could they do this? They're monsters, Ava," Bishop replied, his tone cold and unforgiving. "They don't care about human life. They only care about power and profit." He knew that they had stumbled upon something truly dangerous, something that could bring down the entire syndicate. But he also knew that they were now in even greater danger. The maestro would stop at nothing to protect his secrets, to silence them both permanently. They realized the urgency of their situation. They needed to expose the syndicate's crimes to the world, to bring them to justice, and to prevent them from harming any more innocent people. They decided to take the fight to the enemy, to use Ava's voice as a weapon against them, to turn their own code against them. The game had changed, and Ava was no longer just a pawn. She was a player, determined to bring down the syndicate and reclaim her voice. Now armed with knowledge of the syndicate's nefarious activities, Bishop and Ava decided to take the offensive. They knew they couldn't simply go to the authorities. The syndicate had deep connections, and any attempt to involve law enforcement would likely be compromised. They needed to find a way to disrupt the syndicate's operations, expose the maestro, and bring him to justice. They decided to leverage Ava's knowledge of the opera world, using her connections and her understanding of the theater's inner workings to their advantage. Ava knew that the maestro was a patron of the arts, a regular attendee at opera performances, and a frequent backstage visitor. She also knew that he had a particular fondness for a certain exclusive afterparty held at a lavish penthouse suite overlooking the city. Bishop, with his tactical expertise and knowledge of covert operations, devised a plan to infiltrate the penthouse, gather evidence of the syndicate's crimes, and expose the maestro to the world. He would use Ava as bait, knowing that the maestro would be unable to resist the temptation to get close to her again. "It's dangerous, Ava," Bishop said, his voice grave. "This could be a trap. They know we're coming after them." "I know," Ava replied, her eyes filled with determination. "But we can't let them get away with this. I have to do something. I can't just stand by and let them destroy lives." They began to gather information, using Ava's contacts to learn about the security protocols at the penthouse, the identities of the guests who would be attending the after-party, and the location of the maestro's private suite. Bishop used his technical skills to disable surveillance cameras, bypass security systems, and create diversions that would allow them to move undetected. Ava, using her charm and her reputation as a rising opera star, secured an invitation to the after-party. She knew that the maestro would be watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. She had to be careful, to project an image of vulnerability and innocence, while secretly gathering information and preparing for the final confrontation. They planned to use Ava's voice as a weapon once again, subtly altering her singing during a performance at the after-party to transmit coded messages to Bishop, who would be positioned outside the penthouse, monitoring the situation and providing support. The plan was risky, audacious, and fraught with danger. But they knew that it was their only chance to bring down the syndicate and expose the maestro's crimes to the world. They were ready to fight, to use their combined skills and knowledge to turn the tables on their enemies. The final act was about to begin, and the stakes were higher than ever. The after-party at the penthouse was in full swing, a glittering spectacle of wealth and decadence. Ava, dressed in a stunning gown, mingled with the guests, her eyes constantly scanning the room for the maestro. She spotted him across the room, a shadowy figure surrounded by bodyguards. His gaze fixed on her, he raised his glass in a silent toast, a sinister smile playing on his lips. Bishop, positioned on a rooftop overlooking the penthouse, monitored the situation through a high-powered telescope. He saw the maestro approaching Ava, his bodyguards clearing a path through the crowd. He knew that time was running out. Suddenly, Ava was ushered onto a small stage. A grand piano sat waiting. It became clear she was to perform. This was it. As Ava began to sing, Bishop detected a surge of activity within the penthouse. The bodyguards were moving into position, creating a perimeter around the maestro and Ava. He realized that they were not just protecting him. They were preparing for something else. Using his communication device, Bishop contacted Echo, requesting immediate assistance. He knew that he couldn't take on the entire syndicate alone. He needed backup, and he needed it now. As Ava's voice soared through the penthouse, reaching the climax of her aria, Bishop launched his assault. He rappelled down the side of the building, using his grappling hook to swing through the air, crashing through a window and landing inside the penthouse. The scene erupted into chaos. Bodyguards drew their weapons, guests screamed, and Ava continued to sing, her voice unwavering despite the pandemonium. Bishop engaged the bodyguards in a brutal firefight. His movements swift and precise, his aim deadly accurate. Ava, using her training, took cover behind the piano, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that she had to do something to help Bishop, to create a diversion that would allow him to gain the upper hand. She subtly altered her singing, weaving coded messages into the melody, alerting Echo and her team to the location of the syndicate's hidden arms cache. She also used her voice to disorient the bodyguards, hitting high notes that shattered glass and disrupted their concentration. The firefight intensified, bullets flying through the air, shattering chandeliers, and tearing through the expensive furniture. Bishop, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with a ferocity born of desperation. He knew that he had to protect Ava, to ensure that she survived this ordeal. Just as Bishop was about to be overwhelmed, Echo and her team stormed into the penthouse, guns blazing. They engaged the remaining bodyguards, evening the odds and turning the tide of the battle. The standoff was over. The syndicate's operation had been disrupted, and the maestro was within their grasp. Amidst the chaos of the firefight, the maestro managed to slip away, disappearing into his private suite. Bishop, leaving Echo and her team to secure the penthouse, pursued him relentlessly. He knew that this was the final confrontation, the culmination of everything that had led him to this moment. Reached the maestro's suite, a lavishly decorated sanctuary filled with priceless works of art and rare musical instruments. The maestro stood before a large window overlooking the city, his back to Bishop, his silhouette framed against the twinkling lights. "It's over, maestro," Bishop said, his voice cold and unwavering. "There's nowhere left to run." The maestro turned around, his face impassive, his eyes filled with a chilling calm. "On the contrary, Mr. Bishop," he said, his voice smooth and cultured. "It's only just beginning." A tense silence filled the room, the air crackling with unspoken animosity. Bishop recognized something in the maestro's eyes, a hint of familiarity, a shared history that he couldn't quite place. "Do you know who I am, Mr. Bishop?" the maestro asked, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "Do you remember what you did to me?" Suddenly, a flood of memories washed over Bishop, a fragmented sequence of images and emotions. He remembered a mission gone wrong, a betrayal, a fallen comrade. He remembered a young man, full of promise and potential, whose life had been shattered by the syndicate. "You're Marco?" Bishop said, his voice barely a whisper. "But how?" The maestro laughed, a hollow, mocking sound. "Yes, Mr. Bishop. I am Marco. And you are the reason I became the maestro. You are the reason I dedicated my life to destroying everything you hold dear." Flashbacks revealed that Bishop and Marco had been partners, close friends, brothers in arms. They had worked together on countless missions, protecting each other's backs, trusting each other with their lives. But during a mission to infiltrate the syndicate, Marco had been captured, tortured, and left for dead. Bishop, believing him to be dead, had moved on, haunted by guilt and regret. But Marco had survived. He had been rescued by the syndicate, brainwashed, and transformed into a ruthless operative. He had risen through the ranks, becoming the maestro, the leader of the organization he had once sworn to destroy. "You took everything from me, Bishop," the maestro said, his voice filled with venom. "My life, my honor, my humanity. Now, I'm going to take everything from you." The two men engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand combat, a battle of skill, strength, and determination. Bishop fought to protect Ava, to atone for his past mistakes, and to bring the maestro to justice. The maestro fought for revenge, driven by hatred and a desire to inflict pain on the man who had betrayed him. The fight between Bishop and the maestro was a whirlwind of fists, kicks, and desperate maneuvers. They traded blows, their bodies slamming against the walls, their movements fueled by adrenaline and years of pent-up rage. Bishop, despite his superior training, found himself struggling against the maestro's relentless attacks. Marco's hatred gave him strength, pushing him to his limits as the fight raged on. Ava, who had followed Bishop to the suite, watched in horror, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that Bishop was in danger, that the maestro was determined to kill him. She couldn't just stand by and watch. She had to do something. Remembering her training, Ava scanned the room for a weapon, something she could use to help Bishop. Her eyes fell on a delicate glass sculpture, a replica of a lyre, sitting on a nearby table. That it was fragile, but it was the only thing she could find. With a surge of adrenaline, Ava grabbed the sculpture and charged towards the maestro. She swung the lyre with all her might, striking him in the back of the head. The glass shattered, sending shards flying through the air. The maestro staggered, momentarily stunned. Bishop seized the opportunity, delivering a powerful blow to his face, sending him crashing to the ground. The maestro lay motionless, his eyes closed, his body limp. Bishop turned to Ava, his face etched with relief and gratitude. "You saved my life," he said, his voice hoarse. "We saved each other," Ava replied, her eyes filled with tears. But the fight was not over. The maestro stirred. His eyes flickering open, he reached for a hidden weapon. A small, ornate dagger concealed beneath his sleeve, he lunged at Bishop, his eyes filled with murderous intent. Ava reacted instinctively. Remembering Bishop's teachings, she disarmed the maestro, using a swift, precise move she had learned during her training. She twisted his wrist, forcing him to drop the dagger. Then, using her newfound skills, she delivered a series of calculated blows, disabling the maestro and rendering him unconscious. Bishop watched in awe, marveling at her transformation, her courage, and her resourcefulness. "You did it, Ava," Bishop said, his voice filled with pride. "You defeated him." Ava stared at the maestro's unconscious form, her body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. She had never imagined that she was capable of such violence, that she could fight and defend herself with such skill and determination. She realized that she was no longer just an opera singer. She was a survivor, a warrior, a force to be reckoned with. She had found her voice, not just in music, but in action, in courage, and in the unwavering determination to protect herself and those she cared about. With the maestro apprehended, Echo and her team moved swiftly to secure the penthouse and gather evidence. They seized computers, documents, and financial records, all of which pointed to the syndicate's vast criminal network. But the most damning evidence came from Ava's coded songs. Bishop, with Echo's help, released the recordings of Ava's performances to the authorities, along with the decryption key that revealed the hidden messages. The encoded data provided irrefutable proof of the syndicate's involvement in arms dealing, human trafficking, and money laundering. It exposed corrupt politicians, crooked businessmen, and ruthless criminals who had been shielded by the syndicate's power and influence for years. The revelation sent shockwaves through the world. Governments launched investigations, law enforcement agencies conducted raids, and the media exposed the syndicate's crimes in graphic detail, one by one. The syndicate's operatives were arrested, their assets seized, and their operations shut down. The organization that had once seemed untouchable was crumbling before their eyes. Silas, realizing that the game was over, attempted to flee the country, but he was apprehended by Echo's team at the airport. He was taken into custody and charged with multiple crimes, including conspiracy, murder, and human trafficking. The syndicate's vast network of informants and corrupt officials was dismantled, replaced by honest and dedicated individuals who were committed to upholding the law. The victims of the syndicate's crimes were rescued, rehabilitated, and given a chance to rebuild their lives. Ava's voice, which had once been used to transmit coded messages of violence and exploitation, now became a symbol of hope and justice. She testified before Congress, sharing her story and exposing the syndicate's crimes to the world. She used her platform to advocate for the rights of victims, to raise awareness about human trafficking, and to promote peace and understanding. The maestro, now stripped of his power and influence, was brought to trial. He was convicted of multiple crimes and sentenced to life in prison. He spent his remaining days in a dark, isolated cell, haunted by the memories of his past and the knowledge that his actions had brought about his own downfall. The syndicate was gone, its reign of terror brought to an end by the courage and determination of Ava and Bishop. They had faced unimaginable danger, overcome impossible odds, and emerged victorious, not just as survivors, but as heroes. The world was a safer place, thanks to their efforts. In the aftermath of the syndicate's downfall, Ava found herself thrust into the spotlight, celebrated as a hero, a symbol of courage and resilience. She received countless awards and accolades, her story inspiring millions around the world. But amidst the fanfare and the adulation, she felt a sense of unease, a longing for the quiet solitude she had once known. She knew that she could never go back to the life she had lived before. She had been forever changed by her experiences, scarred by the violence and betrayal she had witnessed. But she had also discovered a strength within herself that she never knew existed, a determination to use her voice to make a difference in the world. Bishop, true to his nature, shunned the spotlight, preferring to fade back into the shadows. He had done what he had set out to do. He had protected Ava, avenged his fallen comrade, and brought down the syndicate. His debt was paid, his conscience cleared. He met Ava one last time, in a quiet park on the outskirts of the city. They sat on a bench, side by side, saying nothing, their silence filled with unspoken emotions. Ava knew that he was leaving, that he was returning to his solitary life, far from the noise and chaos of the world. "Thank you," Ava said, her voice barely a whisper. "For everything." Bishop nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "You didn't need me, Ava," he said. "You saved yourself." He stood up, turning to leave. Ava reached out, taking his hand. Their fingers intertwined, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had forged, the shared experiences that had changed them both forever. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it, disappearing into the crowd. Ava watched him go, her heart filled with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. She knew that she would never see him again, but she would never forget him. She had learned so much from him. How to fight, how to survive, how to trust her instincts, and how to embrace her inner strength. She was no longer just an opera singer. She was a warrior, a survivor, a force to be reckoned with, and she was ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that she could handle anything that came her way. She returned to her career, her voice stronger and more resonant than ever before. She sang with passion, with conviction, and with a newfound sense of purpose. She used her music to inspire, to heal, and to promote peace and understanding. She had found her true calling, and she was determined to use it to make the world a better place. Months later, Ava stood on the stage of a grand concert hall, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight. The hall was packed with dignitaries, celebrities, and ordinary people who had been touched by her story. She was about to perform her first major concert since the downfall of the syndicate, a performance that would be broadcast around the world. She took a deep breath, composing herself, her heart filled with a mixture of anticipation and gratitude. She looked out at the audience, her eyes scanning the faces, searching for a familiar presence. She knew that Bishop wouldn't be there, that he was far away, living his solitary life in the shadows. But she couldn't help but hope that he was watching, that he was proud of what she had become. She stepped to the microphone, her voice clear and resonant, filling the hall with a sense of peace and tranquility. "Before I begin," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "I would like to dedicate this performance to those who fight for the truth, to those who stand up against injustice, and to those who risk their lives to protect the innocent." Her words hung in the air, a subtle nod to Bishop, a silent acknowledgement of his sacrifice and his unwavering commitment to doing what was right. The audience erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the hall as she began to sing. Her voice soared, filling the hall with a power and passion that she had never possessed before. She sang of love, of loss, of hope, and of redemption. She sang of the triumph of good over evil, of the resilience of the human spirit, and of the power of music to heal and inspire. I in a remote cabin nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains. A lone figure sat by a crackling fire, listening to the radio. The figure was Bishop, his face etched with a quiet satisfaction. He heard Ava's dedication, her subtle nod to his sacrifice, and a faint smile touched his lips. He knew that she was safe, that she was strong, and that she was using her voice to make a difference in the world. His mission was complete. He had fulfilled his promise, and he could finally find peace. As Ava's performance reached its climax, the audience rose to their feet, their applause thunderous and unending. They cheered, they wept, and they celebrated the triumph of the human spirit. Ava took a bow, her heart overflowing with gratitude. As the curtain fell, a single question lingered in the air. Would their paths ever cross again? Would Bishop ever return to Ava's life? The answer remained a mystery, a tantalizing possibility that left the audience wondering, hoping, and dreaming of a future where good always triumphs over evil, and where love and justice always prevail. The end.